Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming out here today. We're very excited to be at the Bass Museum. And for those who don't know, this was originally a library that was built by the city founders before it became this wonderful art museum. And we've got some real interesting connections to the speaker that we'll be talking about today. But before we introduce, I want to welcome, we have the Mayor's Senior Policy Advisor, Daniel Sommer. And we're also very honored today to have Commissioner Alex Fernandez, who is going to make some remarks. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting us to be here today. Today we see so many people from around the world come to our city. So many individuals with wealth wanting to be a part of this great paradise and this beautiful island for everything that it has to offer. It's easy to see vision now. It may not have been as easy back in the early 1900s, when John Collins was just a farmer from New Jersey with a plot of land, looking to cultivate the land, and he did it. And he did it, and not only did he cultivate this land, but he eventually saw the vision to build on that land something greater. He was able to grab the attention of the Loomis brothers and Carl Fisher and everyone else who has made the beginnings of this city the grounds where we stand today, and the destination that we enjoy and the home that we truly enjoy. The vision is easy to see today. Perhaps it wasn't that easy to see before. And that's what really is so spectacular about someone like John Collins. He has the vision to get Miami Beach started. The vision that before even Carl Fisher had that vision, he was the one that had, and we celebrate Carl Fisher so much throughout our community. So it's great to have his great grandson here today, Thornton. And I'm gonna ask Thornton to come forward, and Daniel, if you join me as well. Because on behalf of our mayor, on behalf of our city commission, but most especially on behalf of the residents of our community, it's our honor to designate today a day in honor of a visionary pioneer whose entrepreneurial spirit and vision really created the future that we enjoy today and proclaim today officially as John Collins Day in the city of Miami Beach.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. And for those of you who don't know, I just heard that Danny is quite and quite familiar on John Collins. So,
as a matter of fact, this building was originally called the John S. Collins Memorial Library.
Look at that.
And we're in Collins Park, which was land that John Collins donated to be a park. And of course, we're on Collins Avenue. So John
there you go.
Has a long history since 1896 with the city of Miami Beach. He actually called the name Miami Beach when he called the Miami Beach Improvement Company.
That was a hard one to come up with, wasn't it?
And that was Function Beach, Dalton Beach, East Miami.
All those were already taken, though. So let me think harder.
He also constructed the Venetian Bridge, which at the time was what was it called?
The Collins
Yep.
Bridge.
It was the longest bridge in the world at the time.
The longest wooden bridge in the world at that time.
Look at that.
Yes.
Yes.
A lot. All right.
Very exciting. Thank you guys. Thank you, Commissioner, so much. So without further ado, we want to welcome Thorn. And I know that for so many of us, the origin story of Miami Beach is part of what makes it so unique. This mangrove swamp that was, I think it's on Carl Fisher's memorial that it says, Carl Fisher carved a city out of a jungle. But he couldn't have done that without John Collins. And so we're so lucky to have this entrepreneurial family here today. And there's also a big MDPL and Barbara Kappeman connection as well. So please join me in welcoming Thorn.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm here just to share some stories and some photos of my family and my mentors, people that have been very special in my life. A couple of them I have never even met. We talked about John Collins and Thomas Pancoast. I never met them, but you'll see some that I did meet. My family's been very supportive and helpful to me. I just have to say a big thank you to my wife, Teresa, because she's here today. There were a lot of times in the early going of my career, working with Barbara, starting out in architectural practice, where a lot of the work was pro bono, didn't have really much promise of financial return for a while, and she's been a dedicated French teacher in her career, and that really helped us through, and so my family's been a great source of inspiration to me. Let's start this out by talking about Barbara. Barbara, I met back through Bernard Zyskovich. I'm going to tell you how that worked out. I knew her probably from about 1980 to when she died, or maybe 1979, I believe is when I met her, until she died in 1990. I jumped right in. I mean, once I heard about Barbara, I jumped right in. And actually, that's me with the almost like Beatles haircut in the back, when I actually had more hair than I do now. But and that's before I started wearing hats all the time. It was Barbara's two sons, Andrew and John, who asked me to be one of 6 people to deliver a eulogy for Barbara at her service at Temple Emmanuel right down the road on Washington Avenue. And it was one of the most special and prestigious moments in my life. And I'd like to I'm not going to read the whole elegy that I gave. It was a poem that I wrote probably the weekend before, but there were some excerpts that I just thought would be appropriate to start this out. Barbara found the silence oppressive, structures and streets lying dormant with peculiar and beguiling similarities to places rooted in machine age icons in silhouette, stucco friezes in relief, shadow lines from streaming sunlight, and everywhere she made you look, an architecture abounded. She was awed by the implications and set about her years of advocacy for the right to that which is essential in all of our lives, a sense of place, this place. So that was actually printed, let me go back. That was actually printed in the National Trust for Historic Preservation National Awards Program for 1990. So Joseph Z. Fleming, an attorney friend, actually got the National Trust to publish that. I met Barbara through Bernard Zyskovich. He and I were introduced by his former boss, Lester Pancoast, who was the son of Russell Pancoast and my uncle. And so Bernard started his practice back in 1977 in this little wood cottage, and it had since been moved across the street in Coconut Grove. We sought it out one day on the neighbors who had acquired it and went and explored it. And that was a lot of fun, and it really took us back. Bernard and I were partners briefly, and then he went on to establish a firm that grew as many, like today, Zyskovich has over 160 employees doing a lot of work. Bernard's first employee number 1 for Bernard Zyskovich, was a woman named Bonnie Liss, and she was married to a wonderful writer named Robert Liss. And Robert did all the stories in the Miami Herald about saving South Beach. The demolitions, things were happening. It was a lot of protests, and he was covering it like crazy. Probably, though, his most important writing that he ever did was the book Fading Rainbow, in which he covered his own demise due to leukemia. And it went so fast, and he passed so quickly at age 34, that his wife Bonnie, who had worked for Bernard, had to finish the book for him. Barbara was a master at publicity. You know, she had the background of knowing, you know, economics and politics and marketing, public relations. So she would get herself positioned right on magazine covers, and she would call the press, and there would be reasons to cover Barbara. I'm really gratified that I see again protests on South Beach when it comes to the kinds of changes they're talking about with respect to, you know, this idea that we need affordable housing. So we're going to let affordable housing trump historic preservation anywhere, anytime. You just follow the new law that they're just writing and getting passed, and that'll be fine. You can take out the Clevelander, you can take out whatever assemblage of historic buildings you want in the name of affordable housing. And it's kind of a sin for many reasons, which if you have any questions, we can maybe talk about that as a group. I want to leave time for questions, so I'm already behind schedule. So my first real challenge with Barbara was the senator. And my dad's sister had married Lawton Chiles, who was a senator and later governor of Florida. Barbara knew that. She said, "Thorn, you got to get the governor to come rescue the senator." And it's like, "Barbara, that's not happening. He's a U.S. senator. He's not really going to get in the trenches." I called him. It's like, yeah. He was a little lukewarm to the idea. But anyway, we went about doing what we could. And it was really sad that there was such quality there. I mean, look at the acid-etched glass that was still in place after they had started demolition on the senator. Just beautiful artistic pieces of glass. And then they discovered asbestos in the building. And it was that moment when they discovered asbestos in the building that the demolition had to stop. And Barbara says, "Thorn, get over here. This weekend, you're going to do a drawing. We're going to find a way to save this building as a fragment. You know, this fragment can be something. You know, we don't have to tear the whole thing down. What can you do? Can you give us a sketch?" So I did a sketch showing how a parking garage would get inserted into the fragment, and everybody on our side of the argument loved it. They said, "This is like a way to memorialize indiscriminate demolition and still let them meet their program." And so she said, "Okay, press, okay, architect has a plan. He's going around the corner. He's going to go up to talk to the Royale group, and he's going to come back and tell us what they say." And I came back and I said, "Oh, that's very nice, young man. You know, we've already thought all about that, and you know, it's like, it's not going to happen. Bye-bye." So, and then after another week or two, the demolition proceeded. The next thing I got into with Barbara was Opa-locka. She had been contacted by the mayor and State Representative Willie Logan, come out and help us save some of these buildings. The first building was the Hurt building, which had been a gas station and a hotel and grocery store in Glenn Curtis's Arabian Nights festival of a community called Opa-locka. So Florida had all themed architectural communities. This one was going to be A Midsummer Night's Dream, English. But then Glenn Curtis's sister said, "That sounds just like an Arabian Nights dream." So Curtis changed it, and he had his New York architect, Bernard Mueller, change all the designs to Moorish revival. Barbara said, "Look, you need a construction fence." So there's the construction fence. Let's paint it. Let's have an art project. Let's get publicity. Let's get artists. So she helped me get all the artists to do the construction fence. And we started getting into demolition and renovation. And we had to rebuild the domes out of bent pipe. First time, actually last time. I've never done that again. You know, a bent pipe dome on a building in South Florida. And it turned out pretty nice, actually. There were 3 little domes and a couple of minarets and some half-moon spires. The other thing that happened in Opa-locka is she said, it's not just individual buildings. We need to create the whole context. We need to have facade treatment programs. So she got the county to bring money together for commercial buildings on Opa-locka Boulevard to be brought into the theme. So this was a convenience store that I just did some quick drawings on, and the contractor built it, and it's like pastiche, it's like a stage set, but it really worked. It really got people excited. They wanted us to also do the street crossings. So I got each street crossing, there were 5 of them from City Hall to the Hurt Building. We came up with a different design for traffic paint, standard colors in traffic paint, and let's make a Moorish theme for the street crossings. And the first one that we poured, Mayor Robert Ingram was there, and I was ceremoniously pouring the paint out for the first one, and would you believe a drop of paint jumped off the ground and jumped right onto his beautiful trousers. Mr. Mayor, I'm so sorry. Let me pay for that, please. Let me pay. No, you don't have to do that. Seriously, I'm going to pay for that. It was my mistake. That's the first and last time I've ever given cash to a sitting politician. This is Willie Logan, who's still in charge at the Opelika Community Development Corporation, talking to Barbara. This project got us a lot of publicity. We got into Preservation Magazine. I think, again, thanks to couple of good words from Barbara. This is the City Hall that I referred to at the other end of Opelika Boulevard. The renovation there was done by architect Les Balinson, who is no longer with us. And I started getting a lot of little commissions, rolling in. This is when my career as a preservation architect really worked. And this was the first, if there's any other, but this was the Shelburne House, which is housing for people with AIDS. And it was in, like 1996, 1995, 96 when we did it. And it was quite controversial, at the city commission. Can they do that? Can you let people with AIDS live in our community? And it's like, these people, there's not like on-site health care. There's independent living. You can't discriminate against these people. And thanks to people like Ernie Martin and others at the county who were funding it, helping to fund it, it went through and it won a preservation award. Happens to have Barbara's name on it, the Capitman Award. Are they still giving those out?
We need to revamp that.
There you go. Let's do them again. I then was able to be called by Architectonica to put me as their preservation architect for the African American Hotel project. Maybe you heard about the Royal Palm project, which the city had to set aside a project for African American business folks to lead the team and be the owner because they had snubbed Nelson Mandela when he came to town. And that didn't go over well. There was a boycott and the publicity began to really smell bad. And so they said, okay, we're going to make a black-owned hotel happen. So Architectonica was on a team. There were 7 teams. 7 African-American owners came to Miami Beach to propose. And the scheme, I think, really, and it also involved the shore crest right next to the Royal Palm. So the Royal Palm was 7 stories, shore crest 3 stories. What I think I pretty much pushed Architectonica and Don Peebles, was the developer, he was the owner, into not taking the 3-story shore crest and the 7-story Royal Palm and just glomming, something onto the back and maximizing everything. I said, what if we could keep them separate? Because, the tradition of Miami Beach hotels is the air moves through, the sunlight moves through all these buildings. And if you put some big blob on the back of these hotels, you're really doing a disservice. So that's the way they did the renderings. They did the renderings where obviously there's going to have to be major new footprint to make it economically viable as a convention-related hotel. One of the things they ran into, unfortunately, was the Royal Palm had substandard concrete. All the chloride values were horrible. The concrete was turning to sand, the rebar was all rusting, and the city had not really divulged that or even let Peebles get in before he won the project to do it. So since we had the whole site plan was based on that building being there, and it had setback violations, we had to reconstruct the hotel. Now, architects all day long have done 2, 3, 4-story masonry bearing wall buildings with the tie beams and the tie columns totally messed up, and you can reinforce those within the shell of the masonry wall. But when you have columns, beams, and nothing else, and those are substandard, there was no engineer that we could find that would. So we did a reconstruction. And before we did the reconstruction, we cut out little pieces of DNA out of the original hotel. The floor, the terrazzo floor, this is after the renovation. That piece was original. It went back into place. That reception desk was original and went back into place. All these things were put in storage for like 2.5, 3 years. And at the end of the project, I had suggested that we do a full historic display that would be in the lobby of Miami Beach's history with the Royal Palm project in context, and it tells the whole story. It's not in the main lobby anymore. It's off to the side. They had to move it for whatever reason. Of course, Peebles is no longer the owner, so maybe that had something to do with it, because he's talked about prominently in the third panel there. And this is how it looks today. Right after that, again with Architectonica was asked to design a new building between 10th and 11th, and this was their new building, and there were 4 other buildings. Everything from the Clevelander, which was not included in this project, but a 1960s building, a 1930s building, the Congress Hotel, a 1950s building by Tony Sherman, and kind of a nautical moderne, and back to a 1920s. So you had all these different decades, including the 2000s. And so this was a really fun project to work on. We did all the design work, and the ownership changed, and it went to a different architect to execute our designs. And unfortunately, it didn't quite get the paint. I wanted a little more variation in the paint, but it all ended up pure white. This is right on the heels of that as well, was right behind that project between 10th and 11th on Collins, was one of the city's early parking garages. And I was asked to design it and try to do it in a contextual way. And the first thing I noticed was all the hotels in the mid-block, because this was a mid-block composition. You had the Essex on the corner, and you had another hotel on the other corner, but in the middle of the block, you had like 50-foot lots, and then you had a green space between each 50-foot lot. So I said, what if we could make this parking garage tell that story? So I put a little strip of green in between each of the 35-foot wide sections of the facade. And the one in the middle is kind of curved, and it just had a really nice composition to it. And also very important, we had a complete strip of retail on the ground floor to really make that building work. And unfortunately today, it's all painted white again. So I just drove by it this morning, and I saw that I had known for a couple years, I don't know, shouldn't there be something about that? You don't just get to paint things without thinking about the original colors. So here we are, the Collins Library. This looks like a photograph before it was finished, big public event. It almost seems like you can see all the way through the building. How did Russell Pancoast get that job? How did Russell Pancoast get to be the architect of that project? Well, you already heard, he was the grandson of John Collins, so that makes it pretty obvious. What did John Collins encounter when he got here? He encountered the primordial Miami Beach. He made his first visit to Miami Beach in 1893 to check on partners who were attempting to farm a sandy area of the beach. Like not the beach itself, but inland. So this would be the scrub palms, the mangrove hammocks, and that was called Alligator Hole, that I think opened up into Pancoast Lake or some other place on Indian Creek. The only problem was it wasn't alligators, it was crocodiles. So as they were developing Miami Beach, they would constantly be rounding up crocodiles. And this is Alligator Joe. Now, he didn't get to Miami Beach. He stayed on the Miami River, but he would sell alligator eggs that you could eat. And in his dugout canoe, he has several of them have already hatched, and they're starting to crawl around here. These pictures, a lot of them are from the Matlack collection, which I happen to have Thomas Pancoast's original Matlack collection book that he hired Claude Matlack to photograph the early development of Miami Beach. And that's all in that book. You can look at later if you have time. I began to get disturbed because, growing up, I wanted to be a marine biologist. Enough of this family architecture stuff. I want to be a marine biologist, Jacques Cousteau, Sylvia Earle. And I became concerned about these pictures. I would see the mangroves, red mangroves, 60 feet tall, some of them just being clear cut, Bahamian laborers. You couldn't, there's no machines that would go in and take these things down. And that's what happened. And they would put the sand right on top of the mangrove roots. So Collins built the first bridge. You heard about that. Before Collins' bridge, there was a boat drop-off. This was possibly the first building on Miami Beach, that little kind of open pavilion casino. And these people didn't want Collins to build the bridge because they were going to lose money. I mean, if you don't come on our boat, we're going to charge you 25 cents. $2,024, that's about $8.75. So, and there's Collins at the 2.5 mile mark as the bridge approaches Miami Beach. Now, this famous photograph in the car with, I think, my grandfather as a 15-year-old boy at the wheel, and Thomas Pancoast here, his father. People don't know about this, that the sand and the rock didn't connect well to the bridge. So all these nicely dressed gentlemen and ladies had to get out and turn all the cars around and go back the other way because they couldn't get them off. And this was October of 1912, on opening day of the bridge, first bridge to Miami Beach. This is John Collins' farm. So it was about 1,600 acres. And he had tried coconuts, pineapples, other stuff, but he settled on avocados. Avocados were the real crop that did the best for him. And this was Thomas Pancoast's house right here at the north end of Lake Pancoast. This is the Collins Canal, which he dug to get his produce off of the beach to the west. This is Collins Avenue as a dirt road, and this is kind of a dirt path around this side. This is interesting because this you may recognize as Belle Isle. Okay, the last one on the causeway coming over to the bridge, but it was used as a survey point. So in order to build the Collins Canal, they had no reference points, and they wanted to get here. So they built up giant fires every day when they were digging, and the smoke would go up, and that would give them something to aim at as they cut their way through the mangroves. And by the way, this was called Bull Island. So then it became Belle Island. This is a little bit later photograph of Lake Pancoast, and you can see now the farm is kind of receding, and Thomas Pancoast's house is still here. I like this photo actually because you can see over here John S. Collins' house, the father-in-law. So the Pancoast Hotel was really the first significant beachfront hotel on Miami Beach, 29th and Collins. Later became the Seville, and this was the Pancoast. It was very Mediterranean in feeling. It was designed by architect Martin Hampton in approximately 1922. Russell Pancoast was just graduating from Cornell. He wanted to be the architect for this, but his father and grandfather wouldn't let him, so they hired Martin Hampton. And it was famous because in the lobby it had a room where there was a giant alligator by the name of George. In this case, they decided to go with an alligator again instead of a crocodile because I guess alligators were easier to deal with. Crocodiles were more feisty. And that alligator just totally excited people. So Fisher and Collins and Pancoast joined forces in some areas of the beach, and they created the Miami Beach Bayshore Company. And that was Collins and Pancoast and Fisher together, and the reason we know that both companies are involved here is because we see Thomas Pancoast and we see Carl Fisher's elephants. So Carl Fisher brought elephants to do moving of heavy things, rolling of roadbeds, and so on, and even on Saturdays and Sundays giving kids rides on the elephants. Now this is the Pancoast residence, and it was designed by an architect named King. And Russell Pancoast, as a boy and teenager, was so fascinated with the construction of his father's house, that's what moved him into architecture, was just the very idea of building this house. And so this is Russell Pancoast in architecture school at Cornell. Beaux-Arts studies, you would learn the classics, you would learn the old historic styles. The professor would put a classical vase up on a table. He'd give you a piece of charcoal, a piece of paper, and he'd say, in each hand, hold charcoal and trace the outline of this vase life-size, exactly to scale, in one motion with two hands. And then he would come and he would collect the papers, he would fold them in half, and he would see how your sense of symmetry and proportion and scale was working. And he would do this time and time again. Amazingly, he had met her before, but he met in architecture school Catherine French, and they got married. And Catherine, when she graduated, she somehow got a job in the Philadelphia architectural office, and they didn't want to hire her, but she persuaded them. And she was the only woman architect that she knew of, could find, asking all around, any other women working on the boards in Philadelphia, drawing. No, nobody knew of me. And the reason they didn't want to hire her, because we hire the women, we train them, and then they go off and have babies. And a year later, she goes into her boss and says, I'm so sorry to say this, but I'm pregnant and we're going to be moving back to Miami Beach. But the boss gave her a giant oriental rug as a going away present, so she must have impressed him. That's Russell with my mom. Russell's first major architectural commission was the Surf Club. It was Harvey Firestone, the force behind this project. He wanted to go way up to what eventually would become 90th Street, because he wanted to get away from all the activity in Miami Beach so that these rich folks could do, fun stuff out of the eyes of, mere mortals. And it was a very well-proportioned Mediterranean revival, kind of palatial place. I think it's really, I don't anymore, I don't think, and Pancoast towards the end of his career didn't like this style at all, but it was well done. Now, I'm not going to show you pictures of the Bass because you're here, but I do, on your way out, I want you to study the friezes, the inscribed artwork made out of cast stone, concrete, by Gus Boland, the artist who also did the seabirds on the corners of the building, which you can see on approximately 4 corners of the building. And this was Gus Boland's house that Russell designed for Gus, and you can see a sculpture out front. And I believe by the shadows, this looks like a north-facing window in an artist's studio, so that would have been about right. I also want you to look at the baobab trees, because the baobab trees were selected by Russell because he was doing kind of an Egyptian-inspired deco. So he had studied Egyptian, and he loved the kind of slightly truncated, triangulated, angled forms, and he just thought with the amount of, and the fact that he could use keystone as the facing from Key Largo. So the baobabs were put on boats in North Africa and brought over across the Atlantic for this project. That's relatively small trees. Hurricane Andrew, we actually saw 1 or 2 of them pop out of the ground, roots like up in the air 25 feet, but they were put back. I wanted to say that I think in the next round of thinking about the Bass, we're going to be looking at not letting people just go up and carve their initials in all the trees. So every single tree has a whole bunch of initials all the way around, because there's access all the way around, and it looks like an elephant's foot. So let me go up and do something to it. Maybe not too loving, although they all have hearts and initials. So Russell's other work included the Peter Miller, which was kind of a hybrid between Deco and Mediterranean. He did the gas station at 17th Avenue and Coral Way near where Teresa and I live. And that one is still there. There were 3 of these, and that one's the only one left. He did a very Art Deco hotel in Fort Lauderdale, and he did the original Exotic Gardens tropical plant boutique on Lincoln Road. There's a whole story with this, which I won't get into, to say he did the remodeling of the original Palm Island Club on Palm Island for Lew Walters. And Lew Walters is famous because he is the father of Barbara Walters. And he converted that Palm Island Club into the Latin Quarter. And he also had a Latin Quarter in New York City. And this lasted until the early 1950s, or I'm not sure if it was sometime in the 1950s when it burned down. Russell's residential work was mostly Mediterranean in the 20s and early 30s, but he was characterized by, very organic stairs, beautiful stairways, many of them curving and circular. Now, Kay, she was an architect, but she had a baby. She couldn't practice. In reality, she was raising a family, but she was so creative. She did a lot of graphic design in the early days, some of it for Hotel Pancoast, some of it for others. She started wallpapers and fabric design. So before she got into ceramics, which is what she eventually became very well known for, which I'll show you a couple of those, she did this. I found this in her collection of fabrics that she was doing, reflections of a city on the water. And I had been taking photographs of kind of the same thing over the years, and I got kind of tickled when I found that my grandmother had a similar artistic urge. What she really did, though, is she got into community service, and she was the director of the Recreational Pier Association. So in 1942 and 1945, most of you know, Miami Beach was taken over by the military. Generals walked into hotels and said, "We're here, we'd like to get your keys, please. We'll get it back to you as soon as possible, but you will not be running this hotel for a period of time." So here's a map, and sorry. It was not just the Servicemen's Pier. It was all of these hotels, all of these functions. The headquarters was over here, and this was Biscayne Street, just south of First Street. And Kay, my grandmother, ran that, and probably she's the only Cornell architecture graduate ever to get photographed between two military top brass. I'm just guessing, I don't know. Her responsibilities was bringing the town girls over. And I have this report of the 3 years of the Recreational Pier Association, which is where I found this photograph. And she goes through all of the rules and thinking and regulations and protocols about how young women would come from town and engage these servicemen in dancing and so on and so on. Now, what she didn't talk about in here is every once in a while there would be a German U-boat that would be spotted offshore, and they'd have to cut the lights on the pier, sometimes in the middle of social activities. I can only imagine this was considered a plus by some of the servicemen. So my mom was big into fishing, along with her brother, Lester Pancoast, and her father, Russell. They totally knew the Miami Beach environment. After the war, Russell's thinking became more environmental as an architect. He started getting away from the strict Mediterranean because he realized the Mediterranean architecture was from further north and therefore colder, and they didn't have the same rainfall. It was just a different climate. So people were designing things, probably going back to Vizcaya. Vizcaya inspired a lot. So he started to change his architecture, and he started to talk about changing the architecture away from the Mediterranean revival. And he became a little more streamlined, a little more open. So my mom got back from Cornell in 1949. She got a nice graduation present. And my father he wasn't my father then. He was at University of Florida, and he asked his architecture professor, Alfred Browning Parker. Some people may know that name. One of South Florida's preeminent architects was teaching architecture at the University of Florida in 1949 when my dad graduated. Coincidentally, in 1994, Alfred Browning Parker was not still, but also teaching again architecture at the University of Florida. He says, "Al, where can I go work in Miami?" Al Parker says, "Go talk to Russell Pancoast. He's got a lot of work." So my dad went to Russell Pancoast's office. My mom's working in the office, helping her dad out. He goes, "Boss's daughter, I'm going to ask her out." And long story, he becomes a partner eventually. And he was a super architectural salesman, my father. And one of the first big projects he brought into the office was the 1964 World's Fair in New York, the Florida Pavilion, a very kitschy pavilion with performing dolphins and a giant tower with a plastic orange on top. But it was such a massive project for any Miami architectural firm that they had to get their own engineers in-house. So that's when they became an AE firm, and they stuck with that AE approach for the rest of their history through what remnants they are today. They did a lot of MIMO stuff, like this insurance office with Brie Soleil, and they did the original Museum of Science on the Vizcaya campus. They did my grandfather hired Hilario Candela, which was really the first Cuban-American architect who was a real designer. And he was the one who did most of the design on the Marine Stadium. And they got into a lot of, in the 60s, they got into a lot of concrete. You would call it maybe brutalism, but this is one of my favorites, which is the Mailman-Child Development Center on the campus of the Medical Center campus. In 1960, Russell Pancoast wanted a new house, and he was starting to design it. And Lester was like, "Let me see what you're doing." So he looked at it, and I think we can do better. And so he kind of took over the design of Russell's house, because Lester was becoming a Japanese modernist. He was very into Zen, he was very into modernism, and so they designed this house which had a engawa, which is a Japanese word for this kind of a porch along the water with screen around it. And then all the living was here, and then this was a sort of another garden out here at my grandmother's studio. So my grandmother got her studio. This was the living level. You could never build this house today. It had all sliding doors, none product control approval. In Hurricane Andrew, 1992, after it had been bought and owned for several years by an El Salvadorian family, the roof lifted off the house, and it was not rebuilt according to this. But she had her studio there, and later in her career, she was a very well-known ceramic artist, muralist. She did for us, for our family, she did an entire family story in one ceramic piece about yay big. She did a number of murals and flat tiles, very inspired by geometry and all different interpretations and commissions that she got. She did teach me that every time that I saw red glaze, she said, "You have to know there's gold in that glaze, because it's the element gold that creates the red in ceramic." My mom didn't go in, even though she was a fine arts graduate, she also became a community organizer. This is building the historic museum at the Vizcaya campus. The old science museum had a historic museum attached to it. She was responsible for really getting that going, and then she got into women's history. She edited books on women's history. My dad built a house right around that same time, 1964, I guess this was, on the water down in Gables Estates. And it was also a tropical modern house. And he did like bush hammered concrete, where he poured ribs of concrete into the walls, and then he would come with a hammer and just alternatively knock the rib so it would create this texture. And then he used Portuguese fishnet floats to create this screen on the stairway, and a bridge, a glass bridge, to connect the two parts of the house. It was a very successful house. Unfortunately, an owner tore it down maybe 20 years ago. We were always in boats, so this is why I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to escape the evil family clutches of architecture, but we'll see how that turned out. Also in 1964, Lester was building his house in Coconut Grove on the canal, and this house was used in Miami Vice as Lieutenant Castillo's house in maybe 2 or 3 episodes, because they wanted a modern house with an edgy tropical flair, but not too expensive, because, you know, on a lieutenant's salary, you wouldn't, you know, expect an opulent mansion. So that this was set up for some of those episodes. And Lester was a big orchid grower, so when he was there, he had orchids growing on this tropical hardwood screen on the front of the house. Lester became a landscape architect later in his career, and in 2003 he passed away. And I had been working with him on the plans, helping him with working drawings on the Japanese garden on Watson Island, the Ichimura Japanese garden. He knew so much about Japanese culture, had so many Japanese contacts, that when I think they found out about Lester and said, "Lester, would you design this garden for us?" And I had to take over. His wife, Helen, gave me like 5 books on Zen gardens, and you know, so the rocks hadn't been placed. I mean, there was a lot of stuff I had to do. And I had to open up books and look to see what would Lester do? Where would he put the rocks? And finally in his career, he became a watercolor artist. So he was really known at the end of his career for these incredible watercolors. He did, you know, he'd do a big watercolor, you know, about that big in 2 days. And he was doing well. He did a lot of them. His wife, Helene, interesting family everywhere. She was the granddaughter of Dr. David Fairchild, and she was the great-granddaughter of Alexander Graham Bell. So how did that work? Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor in Nova Scotia, this is Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. This is Bell's gravesite, looking out at what Bell thought were like lochs, like fjords almost. So it reminded him of the native Scotland. And Helene would go up there all the time, and we had that opportunity to visit the Bell family compound. Bell had 2 daughters. One married a Grosvenor. Grosvenor became the first editor of National Geographic magazine because people don't remember that Alexander Graham Bell founded the National Geographic Society. And the other one married Dr. David Fairchild, who was a botanist who was an employee of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And his charge was to go around the world and collect plants that had value to the country. And this was his home in Coconut Grove, called the Campong. So Helene and Lester spent a lot of time there. I used to go there when I was little, and I would swim in the half saltwater, half freshwater pool. You could open your eyes underwater, and it was like tears. You know, it was just perfect. Helene persuaded Lester to remodel the American Bakery Company bakery as a residential artist facility called the Bakehouse. So Helene was one of 3 women founders of the Bakehouse, and it's been going strong ever since. Kathy Leff is now the new director, and Kathy's doing really great things there. Kathy was Bernard and I, when we were working together as Escovitch and Grafton, she was our project manager for the Allapattah Activity Center because she worked for the City of Miami Department of Community Development. And we were so excited about this project that we hired mime artists to sit on opening day on Michael Walk's concrete street furniture. And that was a great project. Escovitch and Grafton also designed a hotel and casino complex on the Dominican Republic that was never built. We worked for the last assassin of Trujillo, General Antonio Imbert. We had meetings with him surrounded by 7 carbinieris with automatic weapons. I can't say much more about this project right now. We also did, Escovitch really became known for schools. We did our first school was in Little Haiti. So we tried to do a slightly Caribbean modern flavored school in Little Haiti, Toussaint Louverture Elementary School. I really got, after that though, Bernard and I split up. He wanted to have a big firm, I wanted to have a small firm. I got back into trying to help out not-for-profit groups. This was the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Biscayne Nature Center. They had a little trailer in Key Biscayne. I had already been at Sea Camp. I knew all about the marine environment. And in fact, Sea Camp called me and said, would you do a master plan for us? So down on Big Pine Key, I did a master plan for Sea Camp, worked with landscape architects. However, another unbuilt project. More than half of these buildings were going to be new buildings, but we were stopped, perhaps fortunately, I don't know, by the key deer. They said, this habitat, you cannot put a gate across here because the key deer will not be allowed to run through, and their insurance people said we have to have a gate there, and they said, no permit. But I still love key deer. So Marjorie, I started picking her up and bringing her to the nature center. When we were raising money to build a nature center in Key Biscayne, she was 99, 100 years old. I picked her up 2 or 3 times. The first time I went to this house that she lived in Coconut Grove, I said, Marjorie, do you know, this is such a beautiful house. It's like an English thatched cottage. Do you know who the architect was? She said, young man, I commissioned the architect for this house. Do you have any idea how old I am? So I got chopped down pretty quick. She was very, very strongly spoken. But we did build a nature center dedicated to her. And it's there on the north end of Key Biscayne. Anybody been there? You guys? Okay, yeah. Oh, well, I know you've been there. And you've been there. So it's a great place. North end of the Crandon Park parking lot. Siskovich got into green schools, and I stepped into the role of sustainability director because I had been doing a lot of research on LEED and energy and materials and site work sustainability. So we won the first LEED project to be given out by a public entity for a new school. And it happened to be with FAU in Palm Beach County, and it was 135 acres set aside as a nature preserve and 15 acres set aside for the school. So the children could actually take walks through the Pine Preserve. And about that time, we were all reading a book called Last Child in the Woods. And it was a very influential book because it reminded people that, you know, technology circuits brains in different ways than nature did. So you get out in nature and you have so many different kinds of inputs, a little fear, a little wonder, different situations. So these buildings were in response to that. And then we did a post-occupancy evaluation of this school, Pine Jog Elementary. What is your favorite part about the whole school, kids? It's the hydroponic garden. We didn't even draw a hydroponic garden in the school initially, but we had the opportunity during construction to feed the rainwater off the roof and have the rainwater go into cisterns that would then feed water into the kids' school gardens. That was the number one thing they learned that they liked most. And so hands-on learning became obvious to us. When we did our next school, Galaxy, we realized we had to have hands-on and eyes-on. So all the mechanical systems, all the solar hot water, all the ice system to manufacture ice, so that the school didn't have to run air conditioning systems during the day. They would just get the cold water that would melt from the night before because they had demand charges from the utility company, much cheaper to buy electricity at night than in the daytime. We exposed all our systems. Hands-on exhibits everywhere. The kids loved the hands-on exhibits. So we figured the cafeteria could be a learning piazza. They could eat there, they could work there, they could socialize there, they could be constantly stimulated by everything. And we even put the first green roof on a school in Florida, and we put it right over the principal's office. And it almost didn't happen because they could not believe that we would even propose putting a green roof over the principal's office. But we said, look, it's a double redundant system. You have telltales in case it leaks. You see this, and you'll see the water dripping. It'll never leak anyway because we got anyway. We did it. And the idea was to teach kids that, you know, just because you build buildings, you don't automatically have to lose all the habitat. And you can do things up there, science, food. We had the first Science on a Sphere in any school in Florida here. 4 projectors, 300 curriculum modules, a teacher with an iPad, kids sitting, learning all about tidal currents, turtle migratory paths, hurricanes, jet plane routes, night sky illumination, just 3,000 different things that teachers can do with this technology. And it was a $160,000 piece of education that was well received. And then we also figured out ways to do the hallways, not as just hallways, but as alternative learning centers. So you could bring kids out of the sliding glass doors, small groups work together. You had genius bars, you had breakout stations. So the idea was break the mold and get kids active. This was a school we did in the Keys. We designed all the exhibits, the world's longest map of the Florida Keys, satellite photograph 50 feet long to show them where they live. And again, a Science on the Sphere. We got another Science on the Sphere in this school and a lot of hands-on exhibits. My closing project is Miami High. I just want to talk about the biggest challenge I had as a preservation architect. This was done before those green schools, but I wanted to leave it kind of till last because it was 8.5 years took to do the master plan, to do a year and a half of nothing while the teachers, you were responsible for that. You can't spend $84 million on a school while we don't have a raise. We totally understood that. That was 2008. And then 2009, we suddenly started noticing we're all on hold. What do we do? We talked to Bob Graham. He was a graduate of Miami High. What do we do, Bob? How do we? The bids just started coming in lower everywhere. Those bids in 2008 that brought us $84 million started coming down. And we said, let's wait a little. And midway through 2009, the same project, just better drawn plans, a little more bulletproof, so that instead of pre-selecting a contractor to work with us, we actually hard bidded on the streets. The hard bid for the $84 million project came in at $49 million. So we had a project. Fortunately, the best thing was we had all the Kienel and Elliott drawings. My grandfather actually opened Richard Kienel's office on Miami Beach. We had great photographs. There were 49 photographs of all different angles of the school. Made it so much easier for the preservation effort, and also good for the before and afters. So you can see how the renovation went. This is the situation we inherited. All the parking was here, school buses in front, kids were walking across a public street, not allowed by state code. So we closed that street, and we began to think about how could we do new buildings that would fit in and not adversely affect the historic school, including a slightly curving classroom wing on the back, which was single loaded. It had an open hallway. It wasn't even a typical double loaded classrooms on two sides, just so that we could preserve the athletic field. This is the gymnasium, which was also part of the project. Oh, and I want to just say that it was a naturally ventilated school, of course. In 1926, there was no air conditioning. So all the courtyards, all open to these beautiful landscape courtyards. Then in 1963, the windows were closed in. And I started looking at those plans. Pancoast, Fernandez, Grafton, Spillis, they did the plans to close in all these windows because air conditioning, a school in those days, the air conditioning is very inefficient. You couldn't have all these steel windows and expect to keep any kind of temperature. So they totally made my job miserable trying to undo the damage. But as you see, in the final result, we got all the windows back, and these are hurricane impact windows that replicate the configuration, at least, of the originals. We didn't even know there was this beautiful ornamented bridge steel above the library. It was all a suspended ceiling, and all these windows had been closed in. And we were able to go up there and find it and we had to actually do some reconstruction on those metal trusses, but we were able to get the feeling of it back. We had to put air conditioning in. The auditorium didn't need that much work. Fortunately, it had been preserved fairly well. We had these beautiful chandeliers that were on giant cables, and we were restoring them, and somebody was bringing one down, and the cable snapped, and it crunched on the floor. So the courtyard for the library, this is the library wing, that walkway had been closed in. The 1963 Pancoast plans said we need more room for the library. That was horrible. So we figured out a way to do the plan of the library to where we could get that hallway back again. And that was a big win. And I had a little bit of a fail because I was, as a strict preservation architect, I was saying, with these original cast stone, concrete, reinforced elements that were breaking, rebuild those as is, repair them as is. You can't change the configuration. You need to put a stainless steel cable across the top at the required guardrail height. These were 6 inches low. And everybody thought just a terrible idea. So they said, why don't you just rebuild them taller? And it was like, oh God, I got to go to Tallahassee and explain this. Tallahassee agreed. And I think actually they look okay.
I'm from school, so.
All right, one happy graduate. Oh, yeah, after.
Actually, I was going to tell you, you guys started the plan in '07. The proposal came in '07. I was part of the committee as a senior.
Right.
And it came out to 50.4 million renovation, which was the biggest renovation for a school. Honestly, we're going back to back with that. You guys did a beautiful, I went to the grand opening. I went back because honestly,
We were there.
it's beautiful. You guys did a great job. I think for the library, you guys kept the original hardwood floors. You guys restored them back to what it was.
I thought it was all Dade County pine, and we turned one over and it said Alabama. Had an Alabama stamp on the back of the hardwood, so it was Alabama.
You guys did a great job. I mean, it has a whole thing, so congrats.
Thank you for that. We'll catch up later. I've got $40 for you. The music room on the 4th floor, that one pop-up, I don't think there's any 4th floor high school in Dade County, but this one little place was there. And it just so happened that Miami High had a criminal justice magnet program. Perfect mock courtroom. The gymnasium had been expanded. They pushed the wall out, used the same window configuration. They said, you cannot air condition this gymnasium. This is the asylum. When our opponents come here, that's why we have such a good record. It's noisy, it's hot. You can't take that edge away from us. I said, state law, I'm sorry, we have to air condition the gymnasium. One of the proud achievements was all the connectors, which we were required to put in to close that street and build those new buildings and make other connections, was they were the least intrusive as possible. So they didn't really get in the way of much sight lines. And of course, Richard Kienel, my grandfather worked for him. He said, Richard Kienel is a German architect from Philadelphia down here in Miami doing Spanish architecture. So he was kind of casting aspersions on Richard's need of more information about the climate. So Kienel did open stairways. So all the stairways in the school had these beautiful openings, and every time it rained, the tile floors were completely soaking wet and accidents waiting to happen. So we figured out a way to just simply put glass behind the openings. It was very difficult. The original tile floors, polished by footwear over the years. You couldn't pay for a patina like that, and they're just so beautiful to see. And same thing that we did at the Royal Palm, we did for Miami High. We gave them a complete historic exhibit in their lobby, which we put together about the campus and how it evolved and what we did to it in its second century. I think that's basically it. I was thinking, somebody was going to ask me, I'll just pretend I heard this question from you, what are you doing now? Because I've kind of stepped back from Ziskovich. I'm just doing a little consulting where I'm really doing, I talked about other architects' houses. I didn't talk about my house. So what I'm doing now is fixing up the house that we've lived in for 42 years in Coconut Grove, Dade County Pine, bungalow. You would call this a bungalow style house. And I built a big open screen porch on the side, engineered to 186 mile per hour wind uplift. I wanted to use wood columns. My structural engineer, she said, no, you're using steel. So we have a nice screen porch now, and we have like a little Fairchild garden north, and this is where we hang out growing orchids. So I said it was a Dade County pine house. I have some things up here to look at. I have this piece of my house. It's a Dade County pine. You should come up and see it and feel it. It's you can see how close the grain is, and you cannot drive a nail into this wood. You have to pre-drill everything, and the termites will not eat it, which is why Dade County pine houses have been around for all those years. I get under my house and look at the joists. They're perfect. 98 years later, they're perfect. We have the Claude Matlack Pictorial History of the Development of Miami Beach, Florida. I have the Recreational Pier Association of Miami Beach report. I have a couple of monographs of my grandfather's work. You're welcome to look at anything. And thank you so much.